Well, ladies and gentlemen, while I'm filling some dead air, I just wanted to, thank you for being here, whether you're here live or whether you're on Zoom, participating in this conference, listening to what our presenters have to say, taking the time out of your lives to examine and re-examine the information that we were presented when we were much younger and the information that we're presented today and at other conferences. Being here to be able to share the information that you're learning here today with others. Here he is, we found him again. But anyway, I do want to thank you for your presence and for your participation in being here. And ladies and gentlemen, it's now my honor to once again introduce our speaker, the one and only, the inimitable, Ed Tatro, who's going to be speaking on the TFX Fighter Scandal. Ladies and gentlemen, to Ed Tatro. I do want to call you Ted.
He really does want to call me Ted. It always reminds me, the first two books that I was acknowledged in, I had written to the authors as, I just wrote Ed, and so they call me Edward. So, and then I sent a lot of information to John Davis, who was related to the Kennedys, and he was writing about the mob ends, and he used, I implicated the former governor of Massachusetts in the case, William Weld, and I got footnoted as Edgar T. Tatro. Well, that's Edgar F. Tatro. For this 3 times. And some of the times they'll have a speaker, a famous speaker, like radio speakers, national, but they don't know us. And they get up there and they introduce you, and they'll go, Ed Tatro. And the audience yells, Tatro! And which reminds me of when I was younger, a mailman came to the door, and he said, package for Radoff. Now that's serious dyslexia. Radoff. Okay, with that out of the way. This is an impossible task. Text-wise, this is 100, I made a beeping noise, 114 pages. And then there's like 25 pages of footnotes. So, I'm gonna do the best I can, and I did it in Dallas, and I wasn't able to finish. I spent too much time on preliminaries. I do want to throw a few more quotes at you here. I thought that this one was incredibly profound. Those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it, yet those who do study history are doomed to stand by helplessly while everyone else repeats it. So you will avoid that issue, okay? When all is said and done, more is said than done. Okay, it's not paranoia if you're right. And there was a great one here by, what was it? Find it. Come on, Ed, find it. Oh, I'll just have to paraphrase it or get it. John Wayne once said, life is tough. It's even tougher if you're stupid. Okay. And since we're always talking about how we lost and so forth, I was driving to school one day and I was pretty down for whatever reason, and I saw a bumper sticker, and it said, once I gave up all hope, I felt so much better. So with that in mind, there was a song by a group called the Fugs from the 1960s called Nothing. And the whole song is Monday, nothing, Tuesday, nothing. And every time I got depressed, I used to put it on, and I did, cheered me up. Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Okay. How do we do this? The TFX, which is technically the Tactical Fighter Experimental Fighter Plane, in 1962, the contract came up, and it was worth $6.5 billion. It was the largest contract in military history at the time, okay? And there were 2 companies that were up for the possibility of getting the contract. Boeing, I believe, is in Washington, and General Dynamics in Texas. And General Dynamics in Texas got the contract, and they were on the verge of bankruptcy, and it saved them. And of course, it screwed Boeing, all right? And President Kennedy and Robert McNamara were fully behind General Dynamics getting the contract in spite of the fact that what I'm going to tell you is they should never have gotten it. And what we're going to talk about is why Kennedy, an intelligent man, would do something that's contradictory to everything that is positive about the man. And the answer is, it was blackmailed. And it's going to take a while to get to that, but we're going to go through it. And there are a million names in here, but I'll do the best I can. Let's see here. I think if I summarize it by an author named Alfred Steinberg, it's probably the best way to start. Page 1. Steinberg said, in 1962, a serious behind-the-scenes struggle took place at the Pentagon over the awarding of a contract to produce the TFX fighter and bomber planes for the Navy. Secretary of Defense Robert McNamara, top military advisors, and technical experts favored Boeing over General Dynamics. And so what you have is the civilians, Robert McNamara, and his Assistant Secretary of Defense, Roswell Gilpatrick, want to give it to General Dynamics. And the Pentagon boys, Curtis LeMay and company, they want to give it to Boeing. And basically why? It was less expensive and a better plane. Common sense. Common sense did not prevail. Okay. Boeing's plans were superior and cheaper. However, Senator Scoop Jackson noted the great pressure was coming from Texas in favor of General Dynamics, and Republican congressmen began calling the TFX the LBJ. In the end, McNamara awarded the contract to General Dynamics despite the charge that he was wasting an unnecessary $400 million and would give Navy flyers an inferior carrier plane. An estimated $7 to $10 billion was involved. It came out to be $6.5 billion. And in the long run, to make a long story short, what the Pentagon generals knew was that the damn thing they were going to make was going to be too heavy for the aircraft carriers that it was going to be on, and Boeing's wouldn't be. Boeing's would be appropriate. And that seems to be one of the main. There was also something called a brake reverser, which was, Boeing's was excellent, and McNamara was trying to dump on it. Okay, let's see here. All right, I'll take care of that. The only document that exists really that supports General Dynamics is signed by Robert McNamara, the head of the Air Force, Eugene Zuckert, and the Secretary of the Navy, Fred Korth. One of the great minor crooks in the Kennedy assassination saga, as you will see. The McClellan Committee starts investigating, a Senate committee, and we'll get into the summary, hopefully, as we go on. But they basically found out that there were errors worth $32 million that were being made by General Dynamics in their faulty criticisms of the thrust reverser, something to do with brakes. And McClellan's group realized that Boeing's plane would be lighter and therefore ideal for aircraft carriers. They met behind closed doors, but a lot of it is leaked through the years and then various things. The Republicans kept calling it the LBJ, and eventually they ended up calling it the Flying Edsel, because the finale, the F-11, was a complete disaster. It was used, but it was supposed to be a fighter plane, and it ends up being used for weather purposes. So that the people who put the positive spin on it, it's a great plane for predicting the weather, but that's not what it was intended to do originally. All righty. The important guy here, when we get through this, his name is George Spangelberg. He's the Navy's top civilian aeronautical engineer. And he is, I've read his oral history. He does, it's like, it goes on for like 10 chapters. He knew everything about every plane that ever was built. He is God to air flight. And he makes it explicitly clear. This was an absolute disgrace, okay? And he's a civilian. He's not even, part of the military aspect of it. And then there's a guy named Albert Blackburn. He was so good, they called him Mr. TFX. And these two guys just go ape over the disgraceful use of it. Anyway, I can go through all the different generals here and why they believe that General Dynamics plane is a better design than the Boeing one. The Boeing one is better than the general design, but to save time, I won't bother with it. Albert Blackburn, Mr. TFX, said in March of '63, there is no real supportable case to be made for McNamara's choice of General Dynamics on the grounds of operations, technical, management, or cost considerations. The Secretary, McNamara, chose to make a decision on the basis of information different from that evaluated under established ground rules. And that kind of covers it in general. All right. Anyway. Let's see, McNamara kept saying that the defense budget for this is adequate. Efforts to get the whole story out, a lot of it was deleted or altered and so forth. Let's see, what else do I need to get in here? All right. Now, John Connally was Secretary of the Navy. He decides to run for governor, so he leaves the Secretary of the Navy, and Lyndon Johnson recommends Fred Korth to be the next Secretary of the Navy. So you got one crook leaves, and then the head crook suggests another crook. You know, it's sort of like Richard Nixon replacing himself with Gerald Ford. Did you really think he was going to replace himself with an honest man? I mean, Gerald Ford's real name was Leslie King. We had a president with an alias. I mean, you know, what could go wrong? All right. Before I came here, a friend of mine sent me a one-page article I wrote in 1980 about Gerald Ford as a scumbag. It's one page long. I now have 60 pages. Anyway, all right. Let's see where we want to go. Fred Korth, the problem with Fred Korth is he's a banker, and he's head of the Continental Bank in Fort Worth. And he admits he has $160,000 worth of stock in the bank, and General Dynamics is going to use the Bank of Fort Worth as their bank. So you got the Secretary of the Navy, who used to run this bank, and now he's the Secretary of the Navy, but they're still going to use his bank to finance everything. And I think it's called conflict of interest, right? And while he's Secretary of the Navy, he's sending out letters trying to get people to go join his bank. And he's taking them on trips on the Sequoia, the presidential yacht, and there are letters, and he's using Navy secretary, stationery, and eventually when he gets caught doing all this illegal crap, he has to resign, and he says, it's my secretary's fault that I was writing letters on the Navy secretary. You're going to blame his secretary. So, it's so complicated, this whole business thing here. Okay, let me see, where do we want to go? The real thing here is, the congressman, some of these Republican congressmen back there, forget the party affiliation. These are sharp characters. This guy Gross from, I think, Iowa. If President Kennedy and McNamara have any ethical sensitivity, they should fire Korth immediately. Okay? They're shocked that this guy is going to do this. Korth had 16 conferences and 5 telephone calls with General Dynamics officials, okay? And he calls them long-term friends. And he only met with Boeing twice, and one of them had nothing to do with the TFX. Texas officials had a total of 21 conferences and telephone contacts with Fred Korth regarding the TFX situation. And Boeing officials met twice, and one of them didn't have anything to do with the TFX. Eventually, in October of 1963, a month before Kennedy's murder, Korth has to resign. He has to go, okay? But even after he goes, Kennedy still gives speeches saying, nothing improper happened. I believe in McNamara. I believe General Dynamics deserves the contract. Fred Korth is a solid character. And the writers in the New York Times, Arthur Kroc for one, going, what? What the hell's going on? How can he be doing this? He's violating all the fancy speeches he gave about ethics and this and that. Okay. Let's see here. There we go. And I have letters, direct letters of Korth telling people, join our bank, look at who I am, I can do great things for you. It's unbelievable, outrageous stuff. His oral history, he plays dumb. And then the big thing happens. And it's an interesting thing. We'll skip that by. Yeah, here's Kennedy. So I have no evidence that Mr. Korth acted improperly in the TFX matter. It has nothing to do with my opinion I may have about whether Mr. Korth may have written more letters and been busier than he should have been in one way or another. Listen to the spin of that. Okay, the fact of the matter is I have no evidence that Mr. Korth benefited improperly during his term of office in the Navy. I have no evidence, and as I understand it, the press has not produced any, nor the McClellan Committee, which would indicate that in any way he acted improperly in the TFX. And one of the great writers of the time, Clark Mollenhoff, wrote, the president seems to be taking the position that it was wrong for Korth to write letters on Navy stationery promoting his bank, but it was all right for him to make a decision on a contract involving his bank's best customer. Okay, so kind of gives you an overview. Now, see where I want to go here. I want to get to Seth Cantor. Here we go. Those of you who are familiar with Kennedy assassination law know that Seth Cantor, a newspaper reporter, was really important to the Kennedy assassination. On the day President Kennedy was killed, he went to Parkland Hospital, and Jack Ruby's there. And he talks to Jack Ruby, and he talks about, should I close my club down? And he knew him previously. I mean, two men knew each other. They were friendly with each other. You think I should close my club, and so forth and so on. Well, the Warren Commission does not want Jack Ruby at Parkland Hospital, where a bullet appears to have been planted on a stretcher. So the Warren Commission says Cantor's probably wrong about meeting Ruby. He talked to the guy. It wasn't that he just saw him. He talked to him. So they just covered up. Like 15 years later, one of these clowns, Bert Griffin, says, I was wrong. Yeah, that does the country a lot of good 15 years later, right? Well, Seth Cantor had a blockbuster even before the Kennedy assassination. He wrote an article for the Fort Worth Press on October 24, 1962. And I'm going to read it. And the title was TFX Contract is Reported in Bag for General Dynamics Fort Worth. Since the TFX contract was not formally finalized and announced until November 24th, this is a month before the contract is given to General Dynamics. Kansas paragraph says, General Dynamics of Fort Worth will get the multi-billion-dollar defense contract to build the supersonic TFX Air Force and Navy fighter plane. The press learned today from top government officials. So his sources are top government officials. Designers of General Dynamics, working in conjunction with designers at Grumman Aircraft Engineering Company in New York, have clinched the contract for the largest manned aircraft program ever projected by the Defense Department, these sources said. How the hell does he know something a month before? Now, Fred Korth, in his oral history, and McNamara, and the head of the Navy there, Zuckett, all testified under oath before the McClellan Committee that we made the decision a couple of days before, which means Seth Cantor is telling the truth, and if he is, then the highest echelons of the military government committed perjury in front of a Senate committee. That's it. You got to choose Cantor or McNamara and Fred Korth, who's already a crook. We already know that, okay? Korth, in his oral history, essentially calls Cantor a liar. He said that would suggest insider trading, which nobody had even thought of bringing that up. That's another Pandora's box that you bring up, okay? So forth. Let's see here. Where else do we want to go? So the Senate McClellan Committee brings Cantor in front of them under oath. So what do they want to know? Who the hell told you a month before? Was it implied? Was it suggested? Was it just an opinion? You know, so forth. And Cantor is willing to testify that he gained the knowledge from two high echelon government sources, but he would not answer any of the senators' questions, no matter how often they badgered and hammered and rephrased the same question. Now, let me tell you, I've read the transcript, and each senator's going, now, I want you to tell me, well, how about you tell me, on and on and on. And he's going, no, I'm not doing that. He wouldn't even tell them if the two guys were together when they told him. He wouldn't even say, one guy told me and then another guy. He didn't even tell them it was guys, you know. They would not do it. And some of the dialogue is great. Senator Carl Munt of South Dakota. Let me ask a question this way, because you say you have problems in trying to conceal the identity of your source, that it is what you were trying to do. But Mr. Cantor, we have problems too, because it's obvious from your newspaper story and from the sworn testimony before this committee that somebody has lied to the American public in connection with the biggest contract any government ever awarded to any contractor in the history of the world. This is big business. Either your story is a falsification or the testimony before this committee under oath has been highly perjurious on this issue. Now, could you help us in that connection? And Cater said, no. Senator McClellan, you are familiar with the fact that this committee is inquiring into, among other things, whether this decision was actually made on or about the time it was announced 1 month later than your article, or whether it had been made previously. And you are also, I am familiar with the testimony which has been taken here to the effect that it was not made a month beforehand. Yes, I'm aware of that, sir. You know, well, then you can appreciate that if you have written is true, it conflicts with the sworn testimony we have, and blah, 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 going on and on. And he wouldn't squeal. All he would tell him was, it was two high echelon government sources. That's as far as we, and then they say, and do you think those two high echelon sources knew what they were talking about? And he said, who got the contract? Do you have anything to contradict what's taken place? Now, I'm going to jump way ahead because I may not get there because of time constraints. One of the terrific writers in Texas was a woman named Sarah McClendon. She has a whole book out there. And she was the first one to say that Bobby Baker was a protege of Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson went bananas because he was trying to say, Bobby Baker who? I mean, Bobby Baker named one of his kids Lyndon. And he's trying to say, he was just one. He was he worked for the Senate, and there were 49 other senators. And, meanwhile, they're running an abortion clinic and a whorehouse, and they're dealing with Murchison and illegal meat in Haiti, and I can go on forever with the Bobby Baker case. It's an amazing situation. Any rate, where do we want to go here? Paul McClellan, all I want to determine at the moment, trying to pursue the duty of this committee is to get the facts, because I think the public is entitled to know if there has been mismanagement, if there has been any shenanigans in the handling of this contract. And of course, I can't help them. Okay, we talked about that. And Sarah McClendon, on her own, she became kind of friendly with Bobby Baker. And Bobby Baker knew what was going on. And Baker admitted to her that he knew General Dynamics was going to get the contract 2 months before. So now Cantor becomes unimportant. It's in the bag 2 months before. Okay, I wanted to make sure we get to that. And I wrote here a whole thing. Do we accept the word of Fred Korth, a crooked banker, much too close to General Dynamics, and unsavory politicians like Lyndon Johnson and John Connally, a bureaucrat who resigned his Secretary of the Navy position, caught blatantly in conflict of interest violations, but still asserted he was innocent of wrongdoing? Or Seth Cantor, a respected and professional journalist and recipient of the 1974 Medallion of Professional Journalism from the Sigma Delta Chi, the oldest organization of its kind in America, dedicated to the free flow of information vital to a well-informed citizen. Amen. It's common sense. Okay, let's see here. Now, when you start thinking about motive, if you're looking for an innocent one, sort of political, if you will, the TFX in Texas is the home state of Lyndon Johnson with 45 electoral votes. General Dynamics partner in the venture Grumman Aircraft is in New York. That's 24 electoral votes. Theoretically, since the owner of General Dynamics is Henry Crown, and Henry Crown ran the mob in Chicago. Now, I know there are people here who keep talking about Giancana, and obviously that's a big mafia boss, and obviously he knew plenty because he got shot in the face multiple times. But Crown ran Chicago. Okay, and he ran it with another crook named Jacob Avi, and the people working for Avi are people like Jack Ruby, Lenny Patrick, Dave Yaris, Willie Block, people that are all connected to the assassination in one way or another. I'm jumping ahead, but it's kind of important to get that material out there. At any rate, wherever I was, I was trying to do the electoral vote thing. Now, if Boeing got it, it was going to be built in Kansas. That's 8 electoral votes. And Chicago would have been 27 if you count Henry Crown part of this. And I guess Washington, Boeing's company, had 9. So it comes out to electorally 96-17. So that might sway Kennedy a bit, okay? You can throw that out if you're looking for an easier, more innocent explanation for what the hell's going on. Okay, I talked about that. Not only are we talking saving a company or destroying a company by getting this contract, but it was also estimated that if the contract went to General Dynamics, Fort Worth would get into economy-wise another additional $900 million in profit. So there's a lot of money on the line here. All right. Now, essentially, if I had 3 hours, I would do this in slow tempo and go through all this in great detail, but I don't, so I'm going to do the best I can. And what essentially I'm going to talk about is all the people who either own General Dynamics, have an interest in General Dynamics getting a contract, or who work for General Dynamics and security and so forth, and who they are and what their backgrounds are, and there's a lot of them. And every single one of them is a crook. But that's the general thing here of this whole thing. They're all crooks, and many of them have links to the murder of President Kennedy. So I'll do the best I can here, but bear with me, okay? Be kind. Any rate, let's see here. Like this, the guy that runs Grumman Aircraft in New York, he's got all kinds of business interests with Bobby Baker. So you can go into a whole list of things there. The guys who run Grumman Aircraft are close friends with Lyndon Johnson. Used to give him free plane rides, kind of like a Supreme Court justice. One of the head guys there named Retaliata was in frequent touch with Vice President Lyndon Johnson's office. So they're obviously rubbing each other's backs in the background. That's how this thing, the fix, got in. When P.A. Salinger was confronted about these connections, because Jack Anderson started to write about him, I'm quoting him, "Here you go, you want spin? If we were going to be in a position of investigating every unauthorized leak to the press, it would require virtually a task force following reporters around town." That's how they get away from it. Oh, we weren't going to talk about that. Okay? Anyway. Then we have Don Reynolds. David made mention of him. I've got a ton on Don Reynolds because I have documents that were hidden for decades. And he squealed. He didn't just squeal on November 22nd. After Kennedy was killed, he tried to squeal. And he wasn't just squealing, on Lyndon Johnson. He was going after Murchison. And the FBI went after him. They destroyed he had to leave the country. And they went after people in his neighbor. They went after people, people who worked with him. They destroyed that man. Okay? In fact, there's a guy who's related to him who's thinking about writing a book about it all. In fact, he told me a story. He was 11 years old, and the feds used to park outside his house. And at 11 years old, he went up, knocked on the window of an FBI agent car and said, "Don't you have anything better to do than to watch an 11-year-old go to school?" Okay. So anyway, I got to read this because this is really important. I found more information that I've never seen before. During his sworn testimony in a secret session of the Senate Rules Committee on December 1st, 1964, Reynolds said he was inside Bobby Baker's office, and Baker asked Reynolds if he had noticed a man exiting his office. Reynolds said yes. Baker told Reynolds the man was Roy Evans, the president of Grumman Aircraft. Baker then asked Reynolds, "Do you see this flight bag on my desk, this blue flight bag?" To which Reynolds answered, "Yes." Baker asked him, "Would you like to see what is in it?" and added, "Open it." Reynolds did, and he was instructed, and saw $100 bills that were bound in some brown paper or some sort of thing. Baker told Reynolds $100,000 for the TFX contract. Baker told him that the leader Lyndon Johnson, had interceded to make sure that TFX was awarded to General Dynamics Corporation and the money was LBJ's reward. Robert McNamara denied the White House ever interfered with his decision, and J. Edgar Hoover, FBI, never really investigated anyone other than Reynolds. So there it is. You know, Cantor, McClellan, Don Reynolds. You know, the press only needs two sources. Unfortunately, as Will Rogers said, you can't fool all the people all the time, but it isn't necessary. And if I tell it to you 60 years later, it doesn't do us a hell of a lot of good. But at least we know we're right. You know, I mean, they're calling me a theorist. I'm really a realist. You know, you're right. And every once in a while, maybe a guy like me has to come along and say to you, you're not crazy. They're the idiots. You're right. I'm trying to make you feel better. Okay. Okay. Henry Crown. Let's see, I pretty much said it. Henry Crown. Henry Crown was head of General Dynamics, head of the mob in Chicago, bosom buddies with J. Edgar Hoover. When he was investigated for various crimes, Hoover's people just never really investigated, and there are files that were all purged, I believe after Hoover was gone, about Henry Crown. So, you know, it's all pretty much gone. He made an executive vice president of a guy named Patrick Hoy, H-O-Y, and Hoy was convicted of defrauding banks in 4 states, stealing $2 million here. He served 9 months of a 2-year sentence. You know, so he was a crook, and he's, you know, second in charge of General Dynamics. Let's see, Crown helped Kennedy win Chicago in 1960, you know, so we got all that going on. And then after the contract was finalized, in December, they had a big party at General Dynamics, and who's the head of the party? Who's up there partying? Jim Wright, okay, Congressman Jim Wright, Speaker of the House, and eventually he has to resign because the Health Ethics Committee is going to kick him out for corruption and with some kind of phony book he wrote. And Lyndon Johnson's there. And Jim Wright says he's the greatest Texan of them all. And you have to have friends, and they have to stick with you through thick and thin. And he makes it very clear, this contract is ours because of Lyndon Johnson. So 2 more crooks in the pile, along with Henry Crown. Okay, and then we get to this guy, and I've got tons of pages on him. His name is Sidney Korshak. You know, and when you think of mob lawyers, Mr. Milligan's very happy I'm going to talk about Sidney Korshak. Sidney Korshak is probably the most successful, powerful mafia lawyer in world history, okay? And nobody knows him. That's how good he was. You know, the feds knew him, and they wouldn't touch him. And I can read a portion of it if I find it here. Everyone he knew, all the mob leaders he knew, were all murdered. And he walked around scot-free, legally and from violence. That's amazing. And I'll throw this out. I said this in Dallas. He died at the age of 88, a multimillionaire. He had affairs with Rhonda Fleming, Stella Stevens, one of the most beautiful women I ever saw, and Jill St. John. And he was boinking Stevens and St. John at the same time. Crime does pay. You know? All right? Okay. So you might want to call up your local mafia leader and say, okay, what do you need? Anyway, let me see here. What else we want to throw at you? Sidney Korshak's clients, including, he was the head lawyer for General Dynamics. There is absolutely nothing in the record linking Sidney Korshak to the TFX contract. That's how good he was. Because you know, after I tell you what I'm going to tell you, that guy has to have been involved. He has to have been. And yet there's no evidence of it at all. There is another lawyer at the top there is evidence of. His name's Albert Jenner. And he was on the Warren Commission. And he helped frame Oswald. So think about it now. You're the head mafia lawyer, and Albert Jenner, who most of his clients were Chicago mafia, are the 2 guys running the legal system for General Dynamics. And you're going to tell me there wasn't a fix? Now, Robert might know about this, but there are articles out there by certain Kennedy assassination researchers who say the General Dynamics contract was legit. They back, oh, President Kennedy would never do anything wrong. Oh, Henry, McNamara is a wonderful man. And, I don't know if they're stupid or they've got such a horrible agenda or they work for them. I don't know. Anyway, Sidney Korshak represented Paramount Pictures, Madison Square Garden, Schenley Industries, Del Mar Racetrack, now you're into Clint Murchison, the Desert Inn, now you're into mafia people, and the Stardust Hotel casinos, and that's mafia, and the Hilton hotels. All a roadmap to the Chicago outfit. All right, here's an idea. In fact, he used to drive Al Capone around when he was young. So far back he goes. All right. G. Robert Blakey, who was a big mafia guy, he said that Korshak's life was one of living in a minefield and never stepping on anything. That's Blakey's view of him. And I have all kinds of quotes here from Justice Department officials who say, we could never get anything on him. He only took stock options. He always got paid in cash. He never, he wasn't going to fall into the Al Capone, Donald Trump trap. He was wise enough to avoid paper trails. He's involved in briberies, kickbacks, extortion, fraud, labor racketeering. And he never got caught for any of it. Okay, let's see where we want to go from here. In 1964, he had a fundraising dinner at the Loyola, my mouth is dry, Medical School of Chicago, and at the same table he was at, the guest of honor, was Hoover. And Hoover's FBI is investigating him. The fine line between comedy and tragedy, right, Paul? Yeah. It's so sad, it's funny. Let's see here. One department said, if you're going to take on Sidney Korshak, you're going to have to commit a hell of a lot. Maybe if we committed the whole federal strike force to it, we might be able to nail the guy. But there are 4 or 5 guys who are equally as important in organized crime. And what are you going to do? It's just a matter of choosing up sides and smelling armpits. So it's like they just gave up on a guy. The only one who went after him was Seymour Hersh in articles. And Hersh, Korshak calls him up and he says, I don't know if I got the quote. He also knew about Hoffa's murder. I'm going to find that. I'm going to read this quote, but I'll try to find somewhere about. He said to Hersh, Mr. Hersh, let me ask you a question. What are you doing? You're an expert in mass murders. You write about crimes where people are dead and there are bodies all over. Why are you writing about me? You write about murder, blood, running in the ditches and murders. Why are you interested in me? I'm just a businessman. Go back to your mass murders. Go back to the blood and killings and gore that you write about, not about me. And Hersh got the message. Hersh says, Jesus, he never said anything outright, but it was all blood and murders. Okay. In order to save time in that, what's his name there? Francis Ford Coppola and Marlon Brando wanted Al Pacino to play Michael Corleone in The Godfather, but he was already signed up to do the gang who couldn't shoot straight. And they didn't know what to do. So they called, the guys at the top, they called Korshak. Korshak made one phone call to the owner of the principal owner of MGM, who was going to build this big casino mall. And Korshak said, you're not getting the money for it unless Al Pacino becomes Michael Corleone. One phone call, and we get The Godfather. We get him, okay? There was going to be a strike at the opening day in Dodger Stadium in '62, I guess, and the parking lot attendants went on strike. One phone call from Korshak. They fired all the strikers, and they hired Korshak's parking lot attendants who live in California. End of thing. I'm going to quote the producer of Love Story, The Godfather, and Chinatown, Robert Evans. A nod from Korshak and Santa Anita closes. A nod from Korshak and Madison Square Garden stays open. A nod from Korshak and Vegas shuts down. A nod from Korshak and the Dodgers suddenly can play night baseball. Am I exaggerating? Quite the contrary. In the spirit of confidentiality, it's an underplay. That's how powerful this guy was. So there's no record of him being involved with General Dynamics, and it's impossible to believe that he wasn't. Okay? Let's see. Oh, here's that thing about Sidney Korshak, who moved among these men, who knew the secrets that they knew, not only the secrets of the forbidden anatomies of Vegas and Hollywood, of politics and the mob, but also the secrets of the fates of the Kennedys and such that Giancana knew, and Hoffa knew, and Roselli knew, and more of the secrets of the fates of those men themselves. Sidney Korshak, who lived unseen in the heart of the beast, and who at the same time entertained beautifully in Bel Air. Sidney Korshak escaped. No, prevailed, prospered in blessed fortune without so much as a scratch. Okay. And then I did a whole history of all the murders here that Korshak was. Now, one guy, Ed Becker, knew that Carlos Marcello was saying, if you cut off the tail, the head will get you. You know, if you kill Bobby Kennedy, John Kennedy will get you. So you got to kill Kennedy instead. Take the stone out of my shoe. Okay, this Ed Becker, and the FBI, Korshak found out about it, and he was making remarks about Korshak. And Korshak said that Ed Becker's full of shit. You don't listen to him. He's a shakedown artist. And the FBI wanted some excuse not to investigate Marcello and the threats to the Kennedys. So they used Korshak's character references to not investigate that part of the investigation. Okay, so that, again, ties to the Kennedy assassination thing. They used his criticisms to avoid investigating the Marcello threat. Okay, I've done that. Now, what's the name of it? Two people own the Associated Booking Corporation, booking famous people like Creedence Clearwater, Louis Armstrong, the list, Barbra Streisand, goes on and on. It was the third most important booking agency in the country. Two guys ran it, a guy named Joe Glazer, a mob boxing fixer who was a pedophile, arrested several times for raping 13-year-olds, and Sidney Korshak. Well, of course, now that Joe Glazer's got Korshak pushes him out because he's a fool. Jack Ruby visits him before the Kennedy assassination. So there's a link between Ruby and this Glazer. It goes on, and Glazer tries to say, when Lyndon Johnson in April '63 said, President Kennedy's going to come to Dallas in the fall, Ruby had been making phone calls to the mob. The minute Johnson announces that, his phone calls triple to mafia leaders, Giancana people, Trafficante people, Marcello people. It's not an accident. Not an accident at all. Anyway, and so there are several phone calls between Ruby and Glazer. And I always think of that 6 degrees of separation. And there's 1 degree of separation between this Korshak and Jack Ruby. Okay. What else can I do? Okay.
Got about 7 minutes.
I haven't even started. And I knew there was no way to do this. Let's see, what else can I do? I'm just going to have to jump ahead. We'll have to avoid. I'm on page 37 of 113 pages. I told you, hey, if you give me another hour, maybe I can do it. Let's see, what else should I touch upon? Albert Jenner, I suppose I could talk about him. Jenner was a mob lawyer, and he was the key General Dynamics lawyer. And on the Warren Commission, he did everything in his power to frame Oswald. Probably the most important thing was that there was an employment agency who offered Oswald a job at $300 a month, a permanent job. And he had the job already for a couple of years at depository, but that was $100 less, and it was temporary. And the guy that has to make the phone call called the home, got Ruth, and Ruth said he already has a job. He told her the specifics. This is a better paying job and a permanent one. And then when Jenna had to confront her about it, because it's in the record, and she said, "Oh, I told him about it. He wasn't bothered. He didn't bother. He went down, and they had already filled up the job, but there were like 9 openings." Ruth Payne just lied her ass off to Albert Jenner, and Albert Jenner knew she was lying because they got to keep him in the depository, and they can't let anyone know that they kept him in the depository. So that's one of the guys that's responsible for the General Dynamics thing here. Russ Baker in his Bush book does a nice job on Jenna as a scumbag. Let's see, what else can I throw in 7 minutes? Let's see. Hurry up, Ed. I suppose Spangelberg does a tremendous job. Almost all those Pentagon generals that were fighting Kennedy and McNamara, they all were forced to resign or were transferred overseas. Some of them were fired, so they really went to town on those. And even Curtis LeMay, who usually gets a 2-year contract, Kennedy only gave him 1 year. So if you're looking for a motive of LeMay's involvement in the murder, you don't even have to do all the bombs away stuff. He lost a year of his job. He was pissed. He was a walking angry man anyway. All right, let's see, what else can I throw out here? Let's see, who else should I mention? Korth stuff is amazing. Korth is in trouble with the law, and so Johnson sends Abe Fortas to be his lawyer. He says he hasn't done anything wrong, and he gets one of the most crooked lawyers in history to be his defense attorney, who had to resign from the Supreme Court and the whole bit. That's a great move. I think what I probably need to do, I'll do 2 things. If I can do the 2 things, then I'll get out of here. There's a guy named Mason Langford. And Mason Langford was, for starters, very close to the Secret Service agent Mike Howard. And he helped set up security at the Fort Worth leg of the trip. Then he helped provide hotel accommodations for the Oswald women after the assassination at the Inn of the Six Flags, which is owned by Clint Murchison and Bedford Wynn, who are all going to jail if Kennedy's not killed for the Bobby Baker scandal. Okay. Then he's the local head of the firefighters department. Why is that important? The night before the assassination, 9 Secret Service agents go out to the cellar, Pat Kirkwood's cellar, and get shit-faced till 3, 4, 5 in the morning. And Mason sends 2 firemen to protect Kennedy at the hotel. Okay. Then he's Office of Naval Intelligence man, and Ruby and Oswald, the evidence is there that Ruby and Oswald are meeting at the YMCA, and Langford and an Elmer Moore, who is involved in making Perry's entrance wound disappear and telling the doctors you're wrong about what you saw at Parkland. He is involved in investigating whether the 2 men knew each other in YMCA, and he said they didn't, and of course they did. And Langford was part of that investigation. In fact, one of the Secret Service agents said, those Secret Service agents who got drunk and stayed out late like that, they're a disgrace. And you shouldn't judge all Secret Service agents like that. It was Clint Hill. He was one of the Secret Service agents who was out shit-faced. Okay? And then he writes a book. Oswald did it, right? Okay. Langford also was head of security for General Dynamics. And there it is again. Okay? And there it is again. Another head of General Dynamics is a Max Clark. He's friends with the Oswalds. He's friends with Conley. And on it goes. And finally, another member of General Dynamics in the security is a man named I.B. Hale. I.B. Hale is a great football player in Texas history. I.B. Hale sent he's one of the head guys of General Security for General Dynamics. His 2 kids break into Judith Campbell Exner's apartment, Kennedy's mistress. We don't know what he did in there. Billy Celeste said he thinks they bugged the phone. Vito Genovese told Estes when they went to bug the phone, there was a mafia bug and an FBI bug already on there. And when they come out, there were FBI agents keeping surveillance on Exner, and they saw the license plate and they got it, and it was owned by I.B. Hale. And so it's I.B. Hale's kids. Now he was an ex-FBI agent, a friend of Hoover's, so Hoover's not going to arrest the kids. He's not going to get his friend in trouble, so he lets it go, okay? I.B. Hale ends up being involved in the security of setting up the motorcades, the cars, for Kennedy's trip in Texas, all right? I.B. Hale's, one of them, Bobby Hale, marries Kathleen Conley, John Conley's daughter, and kills her. And they think they call it a suicide. You can't make this shit up. It just goes on and on. So if you're looking at it, Johnson, Hoover, Ivy Hale, they all know Kennedy's got a mistress. He can't let that out, so he's got to give General Dynamics the contract. And there it is in a nutshell. Now, I've left out about 70% of what I have here, but I think you get the picture. And I'm trying to be a good boy. Thank you very much. You want me to answer some questions? I'll try.
3 or 4 minutes.
Go ahead, Dan Storper.
Yeah, just, my understanding was that Henry Crown bought 20% control in General Dynamics strategically. Just before, I don't think this is working.
That's not working.
Oh, okay.
Is it working?
Just before the contract was assigned. But you said something about how he ran the mob in Chicago. So, you know, although there are suspicions about that, what
I'm
makes
sure there's brotherly love.
what makes you say that he ran?
I've got a lot of details here that I just don't have time to go through. One other thing I should mention is that Abraham Bolden, the Secret Service agent who got screwed, before the assassination, he was guarding the Oval Office, and he heard RFK, JFK, and Johnson arguing, and Lyndon Johnson saying, "Are you trying to fuck me?" He said, "Don't fuck with me over some goddamn cotton." He's talking about the Billy Celeste scandal. And Abraham Bolden heard that. So these people who don't think that Johnson knew they were going after him, they're crazy. And then when Johnson came out of the Oval Office and he saw the black guy, he said, "Who's that boy?" Well, right back to last night's nigger references, right? Who's that boy? And Abraham Bolden is beyond reproach. So anyway, anything else? Yeah.
I understand Fred Korth was supposed to be testifying on Monday, the 25th.
Exactly. They expect, Business Week published an article saying they expected Fred Korth to testify on November 22nd, 1963, and of course Kennedy was killed, and it never happened. It's good that you brought that up. Very good. Okay?
Okay.
Let the next guy go. All right, thank you very much. That was terrible. It's too hard to do.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ed Tatro. I got it that time. Ladies and gentlemen, I've said this once before, and I believe it with all my heart. Ed Tatro could give a 3-day conference, speak himself from morning to evening, all 3 days, and have interesting material to fill it all. And you'd come back asking for an extra day.
I got 1,400 pages, and just imagine the 1,400 I haven't written yet.
Well, we'll just have to imagine it until we see it. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go ahead and have a break for lunch.